It was one of those late summer afternoons in the village of Much Diddling, when the golden light slanted over the churchyard yews, and the faint hum of bees made one drowsy rather than industrious. The lanes were dusty, the hedgerows bright with dog roses, and the air smelled faintly of hay and lavender polish. To those who had known it for decades, Much Diddling was as peaceful as a painting and just as deceptive, Miss Marple sometimes thought, for paintings, like people, often concealed their cracks beneath a pleasant surface. Miss Jane Marple herself was sitting in the neat little garden of the elms, her vine-covered cottage at the end of the high street. A teapot of china blue porcelain stood beside her, the steam curling lazily in the sunlight. She was knitting something pale and soft for the missionary bazaar, dear, she would have explained, and reflecting, in her quiet, shrewd way, that human nature seldom altered much, even when fashions and morals pretended otherwise. It was just then that Mrs. Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple's old friend and occasional conspirator in curiosity, came bustling up the garden path, her hat slightly askew and her expression somewhere between excitement and righteous indignation. "My dear Jane," Mrs. Bantry began, seating herself without waiting to be invited. "You've heard, I suppose, about Nurse Gladys Reeves?" Miss Marple looked up mildly. "Ah, the district nurse? The tall one with the sensible shoes and rather earnest eyebrows? She attended old Mr. Calthorpe when he broke his hip last year, I believe." "That's the one," cried Mrs. Bantry. "Well, she's vanished." Miss Marple, who never made a show of surprise, merely placed her knitting in her lap. "Vanished, Dolly? Do you mean she's gone away unexpectedly?" "I mean gone," said Mrs. Bantry, lowering her voice dramatically. "Completely disappeared. No one's seen her since Tuesday evening. She was supposed to visit poor Mrs. Penruddock at Hill Farm, but she never arrived. Her bicycle was found propped against the stile near wood, and her medical case lying in the grass." Miss Marple's blue eyes grew thoughtful. "That is curious. A nurse's bag is almost as personal as a clergyman's cassock. One would hardly leave it behind." "Exactly what I said," said Mrs. Bantry. "And what's more, the police were called this morning. Inspector Craddock's come down from the county. You remember him, the nice one with the moustache?" "Indeed," murmured Miss Marple. "He once said, if I recall, that country villages contain more psychology than any city in England." "Well, he'll have his hands full this time," said Mrs. Bantry, "because everyone's talking. You know what people are. Half of them think poor Nurse Reeves has had a breakdown, and the other half are whispering about foul play. No, Cane. Havensibly, Miss Marple poured her friend another cup of tea. Human imagination, Dolly, is often a step ahead of evidence. Still, it is odd. The village and its people. To understand Much Diddling, one had to know its hierarchy. At the top was Sir Basil Montfort, Lord of Montfort Hall, a tall, angular man of about 60, with a clipped grey moustache and a fondness for rules. His wife, Lady Eleanor, was a fragile, nervous creature, whose delicate health had made her a frequent recipient of Nurse Reeves's ministrations. Then there was Dr. Leonard Miles, the village physician, competent, courteous, and rather too good-looking for his own peace of mind. He had recently taken on Nurse Reeves as his assistant, and by all accounts they had worked harmoniously. The vicar, Reverend Samuel Pettifer, lived nearby with his devoted wife Martha, and his young niece Alice, lately arrived from London. Alice had an artistic temperament, wore curious scarves, and was known to sketch in the couf churchyard, which gave the older parishioners something to tut about. And, of course, Constable Fred Pottle, round-faced and conscientious, who was doing his best to impress Inspector Craddock. These were the people most often seen on the village lanes that week, exchanging concerned greetings and comparing theories under the pretext of buying bread or stamps. The last sighting. By Wednesday morning, the whole of Much Diddling was in a flutter. The disappearance of a district nurse, a figure of order and compassion, seemed to cast a shadow over their tranquil routine. Even the milkman lingered longer at each gate, eager for gossip. Miss Marple, who never hurried but always arrived in time, took a small basket to the post office that morning, and happened, quite naturally, to fall into conversation with Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, a bright-eyed widow, whose knowledge of the village correspondence was, though unspoken, encyclopedic. "Terrible business about poor Nurse Reeves," Mrs. Finch said with relish, weighing out the stamps. "I saw her Tuesday, I did. Came in to post a letter foreign, it was, to Switzerland. Neat handwriting, but she looked flustered. Said she'd been up half the night with Lady Eleanor." "To Switzerland?" Miss Marple repeated mildly. "I suppose she had friends abroad." "Could be," said Mrs. Finch. "She never spoke much about herself. Kept her private life to herself, that one. But I always thought there was something, well, secretive, you know." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Many people have secrets, my dear, most of them quite harmless. But sometimes, alas, they grow troublesome." She thanked Mrs. Finch, posted her own letters, and strolled back through the village street, her mind quietly occupied. A nurse posting a foreign letter, vanishing the same evening, and leaving her bicycle and bag by a stile. There was a pattern in it somewhere, as surely as there was a pattern in the lace she kept by her chair. The stile near the woods. By Thursday afternoon, Miss Marple had heard enough to justify a little walk, for the sake of one's digestion. The stile, where Nurse Reeves's bicycle had been found, was on the edge of Witchwood Spinney, a patch of ancient woodland between the hall and the river. It was quiet there, save for the chatter of birds and the faint rustle of leaves. A constable still guarded the area, though without much enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, Constable Pottle," Miss Marple said pleasantly. He touched his cap. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple. Can't say there's much to report. We've searched the wood twice over. No sign of her." "None at all?" asked Miss Marple. "Not even a footprint or a handkerchief?" "Only her bag, miss. Dr. Miles identified it. Found some sedatives, bandages, that sort of thing. Bicycles leaning yonder, no marks of a struggle or nothing. If you ask me, she might have just up and gone off." "Gone off," Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. "Leaving her means of transport and her professional tools? Hardly likely, don't you think?" Constable Pottle flushed slightly. "Well, Inspector Craddock thinks maybe she met someone she knew, and went along quiet-like." Miss Marple nodded, slowly. "Yes, that would be the most natural way of it." She stood a moment, her gaze travelling over the scene, the stile, the path that wound through the wood towards Montfort Hall, and the faint glimmer of water in the distance. A nurse called away, perhaps under pretext, and then silence. Her mind moved as always, not to the melodramatic, but to the human, who might have wished Nurse Reeves gone, who might have feared her knowledge medical or otherwise. At Montfort Hall. That evening, Miss Marple paid a call on Lady Eleanor Montfort, under the guise of delivering some garden roses. Lady Eleanor, pale and tremulous, reclined upon a sofa in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and anxiety. Sir Basil hovered nearby, his manner protective to the point of irritation. "Such kindness, Miss Marple," Lady Eleanor murmured. "It's been such a dreadful shock, poor Nurse Reeves. She was so dependable. I cannot imagine her simply disappearing." "I'm sure it has been distressing," Miss Marple said softly. "You were among the last to see her, I believe," Sir Basil answered briskly. "She left here about 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening. My wife was much improved, and Nurse Reeves said She must visit a patient in the village before going home. She was in perfectly good spirits. Lady Eleanor hesitated, though she did seem thoughtful, perhaps. She asked if I knew of anyone who had been to Switzerland recently. I thought it an odd question. Indeed, murmured Miss Marple, storing that away carefully. Perhaps some medical inquiry? Possibly, said Sir Basil, though his tone suggested he wished the matter concluded. As Miss Marple took her leave, she noted that the butler, Harris, watched her with a curiously wary eye. Servants often knew more than they told, and sometimes less than they imagined. The doctor's house. Later that night, Miss Marple happened to see Dr. Miles passing along the lane. His expression tense, his gait hurried. She hailed him gently. "Doctor, such a worrying business about poor Nurse Reeves." He stopped, clearly fatigued. "Yes, Miss Marple, most distressing. She was an excellent nurse, conscientious to a fault. I can't think what could have happened to her." "You worked closely together?" "For nearly a year," he said. "I relied on her completely," though he hesitated, then gave a rueful smile. "She could be rather secretive at times. Took private patients occasionally, village gentry, mostly. I imagine she needed the extra money." Said Miss Marple. "And did she confide in you about her private affairs?" "Not particularly," said the gown doctor, lighting a cigarette. "She was reserved. I sometimes thought she had had some disappointment, perhaps an unhappy romance, but she was always perfectly composed." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "People who hide their feelings often do so for good reason. I've known more than one case where a secret, carefully guarded, was the cause of very public tragedy." Dr. Miles gave a faint smile. "You sound almost as though you expect one." "Not at all," said Miss Marple mildly. "I merely observe, Doctor, and observation, as I have found, is sometimes more revealing than questions." He laughed softly and bade her good night. But as Miss Marple walked home beneath the soft glow of the lamplight, her thoughts were far from tranquil. A letter to Switzerland, a question about travel, a disappearance near the hall, and the faint impression of fear beneath the nurses. Calm exterior. Someone had disturbed the placid surface of much diddling, and Jane Marple, who had seen many such ripples before, knew that where ripples appeared, deeper waters always stirred beneath. It was Friday morning, and the postman had scarcely finished his round when the news spread that Inspector Craddock himself had called at the vicarage. By midday, the entire village knew he was setting up his inquiries in the reading room beside the church, a convenient headquarters, since it was both neutral ground and equipped with a kettle. Miss Marple, sitting by her parlour window with her embroidery, could almost hear the hum of speculation rising from the high street. Much diddling, usually devoted to the respectable rhythm of parish teas and harvest planning, was alive with whispers. She herself preferred to wait. People who rushed in search of facts, she reflected, often overlooked the most revealing trifles, the way someone polished a spoon while speaking, or how another turned too quickly from a question. Human nature, she thought, always told on itself in the end. So, when Inspector Craddock called at her cottage that afternoon, ostensibly to pay his respects, Miss Marple received him as if the visit were entirely social. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," said Craddock, removing his hat. "I'm afraid we've another puzzle for your village." "I fear so," she said, motioning him to a chair. "And poor Nurse Reeves was so well regarded." "Indeed. I remember her from the influenza outbreak last winter. Most capable woman." He hesitated. "We're treating it as a missing person for the moment, though between ourselves." He gave a small sigh. "It doesn't look promising." Miss Marple poured his tea delicately. Suppose you've made inquiries among her acquaintances? Quite. She lodged with Mrs. Oxley, the widow who keeps the small house by the green. According to her, Nurse Reeves left around 5:30 on Tuesday, saying she had 2 patients to visit Lady Montfort and Mrs. Penruddock. She never came back. Her room was tidy, no sign of packing, no letter left behind. Miss Marple nodded. And the letter to Switzerland? Craddock's brows rose. Ah, you've heard of that. Yes, we traced it. It was addressed to a Dr. Franz Keller, Geneva. Seems she wrote only a few lines. The Swiss? Authorities confirm he's a reputable specialist in diseases of the blood. How very interesting, murmured Miss Marple. Was Lady Eleanor not said to have been rather unwell of late? Craddock gave her a look of respect. You never miss a connection, do you, Miss Marple? My dear Inspector, one simply notices parallels. I recall a case in the village where a gardener's absence coincided with the disappearance of the mayor's prize tulips. The 2 facts proved not unrelated. He smiled. I'll keep that in mind. The nurse's lodgings. Later that afternoon, with Inspector Craddock's permission, Miss Marple took a discreet stroll to Mrs. Oxley's house, a prim little dwelling with white lace curtains and a smell of boiled cabbage that seemed permanent. Mrs. Oxley herself was plump, pink-faced, and plainly delighted to have an audience. Such a shock, Miss Marple, she declared, ushering her in. Gladys, that's Nurse Reeves. She was a quiet one, but always polite, paid her rent regular, never a fuss. But I always said there was something on her mind. Indeed? Said Miss Marple, folding her hands. Did she ever receive letters? Or visitors? Of note? Oh, letters, yes. 1 or 2 every month, foreign-looking they were, and she'd take them up to her room to answer, private-like. As for visitors, only the doctor, sometimes, and once that young artist girl, the vicar's niece, came about some charitable scheme, I think. Miss Alice Pettifer? That's her. Smart as paint, that one. Too modern for my taste, but harmless enough. She and the nurse had a long chat in the garden. That evening Monday, it was just before she disappeared. Miss Marple's eyes brightened a fraction. And did you hear any part of their conversation? Mrs. Oxley pursed her lips. Well, I wasn't listening, not exactly, but I did hear the nurse say, "It's dangerous to meddle, my dear." Sounded sharp, too, and the girl laughed and said something about art revealing truth. Gave me a turn, that did. Quite, said Miss Marple, mildly. And she left the next day, you say? Yes, and I haven't slept right since. Miss Marple thanked her and took her leave, her thoughts turning to the artistic Miss Pettifer and her penchant for sketching the churchyard. Art revealing truth, a curious remark indeed. The vicarage. Visit. Miss Marple called at the vicarage the next morning, under pretext of lending a recipe book to Mrs. Pettifer. She was met by Alice, who was in the garden painting a view of the church spire, her scarf fluttering in the breeze like a flag of independence. "Oh, Miss Marple, how lovely to see you," Alice said brightly. "Do come and see. I'm trying to catch the colour of the sky before the clouds change it." Miss Marple admired the painting dutifully, noting the nervous energy in the brushstrokes. "You have a fine eye for detail, my dear. I understand you knew Nurse Reeves." "Rather well." The girl's brush hesitated. "Not well, but I liked her. She was kind. A little sad, perhaps. We talked sometimes when she came to dress Aunt Martha's ankle." "Ah, yes, I remember. And you saw her the day before she disappeared?" Alice nodded slowly. "We spoke in Mrs. Oxley's garden. I'd been sketching there. I may have said too much. I was upset with Dr. Miles. He dismissed my painting as frivolous. Gladys tried to comfort me. She seems to have said something that startled you." Alice bit her lip. She warned me to be careful what I said that people might overhear, and she mentioned that not everyone in the village was what they seemed. She glanced at Miss Marple suddenly. Do you think something terrible's happened to her? Miss Marple hesitated only a moment. I fear, my dear, that something serious has indeed occurred. But truth, like your art, reveals itself in the end. Tea with Lady Eleanor. That afternoon, Miss Marple paid another call at Montfort Hall. Lady Eleanor, though wan and delicate as ever, seemed calmer. Sir Basil was absent, called to London, she said, and the house felt strangely still. I can hardly sleep, Miss Marple, Lady Eleanor confessed. Every sound at night seems ominous. I keep thinking I hear footsteps in the corridor. Harris insists it's the wind. Miss Marple patted her hand gently. You've had a fright, dear Lady Eleanor. It's only natural. But tell me, do you recall anything unusual about Nurse Reeves that last evening? A change of mood, perhaps? Lady Eleanor frowned slightly. Now you mention it, yes. She seemed anxious, though she tried to hide it. She asked whether I kept any correspondence from my late father, particularly his letters from abroad. I thought it odd, but she said it was connected with a medical matter. Your father travelled widely, I believe? Yes, he was in Switzerland often, years ago. He suffered from a blood condition, rather similar to mine. Why do you ask? Miss Marple smiled benignly. Only curiosity, my dear. 1. Learns the strangest connections in village life. As she left, Miss Marple caught sight of Harris, the butler, speaking quietly to the housekeeper, Mrs. Partridge, in the passageway. The moment they saw her, they fell silent, and Harris's eyes, discreet, watchful, followed her as she went out. The door. Sunday rumours. By Sunday, the village was humming with speculation. Constable Pottle, while buying his morning paper, let slip that divers had searched the river near the spinney. Nothing found, save an old boot and a child's toy pram. Theories bloomed like dandelions that Nurse Reeves had been kidnapped by a foreign spy, that she'd run off with a patient's husband, or that she'd been spirited away for knowing too much about Sir Basil's finances. Miss Marple listened, nodded, and said little. It was not the outlandish theories that interested her, but the quiet, overlooked facts, the letter to Switzerland, the talk of blood disease, the strange warning to Alice Pettifer, a clue in the wood. On Monday morning, Miss Marple set out again toward Witchwood Spinney. She had a small purpose in mind, to see the exact place where the nurse's bicycle had been found. She moved carefully along the edge of the trees, her eyes alert for what others might have missed. It was then she noticed something glinting faintly in the grass, a silver locket half buried in leaves. Opening it with delicate fingers, she saw a tiny photograph, a man in his 30s, smiling faintly in what looked like a Swiss landscape. The back bore an engraving, to G.R., with gratitude F.K. Tay. Miss Marple replaced it thoughtfully. Franz Keller, she mused, the very name from the Swiss letter. Gratitude, not love, perhaps, but something professional. A former patient, or colleague. When she turned to leave, she was not altogether surprised to find Dr. Miles emerging from the trees. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said with forced cheerfulness. "I was checking the ground again, though I doubt there's much left to find. You're very conscientious, Doctor," he shrugged. "I can't help feeling responsible. She was under my supervision, after all." Miss Marple looked at him kindly. "You seem troubled, Doctor. Is there something more you wish to say?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Between ourselves, yes. There was talk, some months ago, that Nurse Reeves had been in Switzerland before coming here. She mentioned working in a private clinic. I never asked details, but lately I wondered if someone from her past might have found her." "How very interesting," said Miss Marple quietly. "One never quite escapes one's past, does one? Especially in small communities." He gave her a long look. "You think someone from Switzerland came after her?" "I think," said Miss Marple gently, "that secrets have a way of travelling faster than one expects." Miss Marple's reflection. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the locket before her on the table. Her knitting lay untouched. She thought of the quiet, capable nurse, of her air of self-possession, tinged with melancholy, and of the people she had tended in the village. Sir Basil Montfort, proud, controlling, rumoured to be in financial straits. Lady Eleanor, frail, dependent, yet not without intelligence. Dr. Miles, competent, secretive, possibly fond of his missing nurse. Alice Pettifer, impulsive, artistic, and perhaps too observant for her own good. Harris, the butler, discreet and wary, possibly more than a servant. In Miss Marple's experience, motives in village crimes were seldom exotic. They boiled down to love, money, fear, or the preservation of a secret. She believed Nurse Reeves had uncovered such a secret, one that threatened someone close at hand. When the church clock struck 10, Miss Marple smiled to herself and murmured, "Yes, I think I begin to see the pattern." Outside, the wind rose softly through the trees of Weechwood Spinney, whispering through the leaves like a voice that had not quite been silenced. The following week brought both rain and revelation to Much Diddling. A low mist hung over the meadows, blurring the outlines of hedges and cottages, as though nature herself wished to keep her secrets. Miss Marple, however, had no such inclination. She had lived too long among human puzzles to be daunted by a little fog. Indeed, she found the soft weather rather useful. People were apt to gossip more freely indoors, over cups of tea and slices of seed cake. A disturbing discovery. It was on Wednesday morning that Constable Pottle, red-faced and puffing, arrived at the Elms. "Beg pardon, Miss Marple," he said, removing his helmet. Inspector Craddock thought, "You'd want to know straight away. They've found something in the spinney." Miss Marple laid aside her knitting with calm precision. "Indeed, Constable, something new." "Yes, miss. A shoe, a woman's shoe, white, size 5, bit muddy, but matches a pair Mrs. Oxley swears belong to Nurse Reeves. And there's more. A fragment of cloth caught on a bramble blue serge, like the lining of her cloak." Miss Marple looked grave. "So, at last, a trace of violence. Well, maybe not," Pottle hedged. "Could have been torn days before, but the inspector thinks it strengthens the theory she met with foul play." "Possibly," Miss Marple murmured, "though one should be cautious of theories, Constable. They tend to blind one to what is actually there." He blinked. Yes, miss." After he departed, Miss Marple remained very still for a long while. Then, with her usual quiet decisiveness, she rose, donned her waterproof, and took her umbrella. There was someone she wished to see, someone whose manner, of late, had been a trifle too guarded. The butler's tale. Montfort Hall was sombre in the mist, its windows dull with condensation. Miss Marple was shown into the library, where Harris, the butler, awaited her. He seemed uneasy. "You wish to speak to me, madam?" "Only a few words, Harris," said Miss Marple pleasantly. "You've been in the Montfort service a long time, I think." 40 years, madam." "Then you must have known the family very well, even before Sir Basil's marriage?" A flicker crossed his face. "Yes, madam. I served his late father also. And, if I may ask, did the late Lord Montfort suffer from some illness? Lady Eleanor mentioned a blood disorder." "Yes, madam. It was hereditary, I believe. The late lord was under treatment in Switzerland for some years." "Ah, Switzerland again," murmured Miss Marple. A curious coincidence, is it not, that Nurse Reeves also spent time there? Harris's expression tightened. I wouldn't know, madam. Oh, but you do, said Miss Marple gently. Forgive me, but I think you were acquainted with her in ways beyond mere household duty. You watched her with particular concern. For a moment, Harris said nothing. Then, quietly, I knew her, madam. Not here, but abroad, at the Montreux Clinic. She was a nurse there when I accompanied the late Lord Montfort for his treatment. She attended him faithfully until his death. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. And after his death, she left the clinic. A year later, I was recalled to serve Sir Basil here. When Nurse Reeves appeared in Much Diddling, I recognized her, though she begged me not to reveal it. She said she had come to England for a fresh start. Did she tell you why she feared being recognized? Harris hesitated, then said, She mentioned documents, madam. Papers that had gone missing after Lord Montfort's death. She believed they were in the possession of someone here, someone who might use them for advantage. Indeed, Miss Marple said softly. And you did not think to tell Sir Basil? I did not dare. Sir Basil has a temper, madam, and his finances, if I may say so, have been troubled. I thought it best to keep silent. Miss Marple rose, her eyes gentle but penetrating. Sometimes silence is the truest form of speech, Harris. But alas, it is also the most dangerous. A strange illness. 2 days later, the village was shaken by another event. Lady Eleanor Montfort collapsed during breakfast. Dr. Miles was summoned in haste and remained at the hall for most of the day. By evening, word spread that she was resting, though gravely weak. Miss Marple, concerned, called that night with a basket of broth. Dr. Miles met her at the door. She's asleep, he said softly. A sudden fainting fit, perhaps. Strain, perhaps nerves. But I'm keeping her under observation. Miss Marple regarded him keenly. You look tired, doctor. Have you had any rest yourself? He gave a weary smile. Not much. There's a sense, forgive me, that this place is cursed. First the nurse disappears. Now, Lady Eleanor nearly follows. I feel responsible for both. You take your duty seriously. But tell me, were you aware that Nurse Reeves once treated the late Lord Montfort in Switzerland? He looked startled. Good heavens, no. Are you certain? Quite certain. Harris confirmed it. He frowned. Then she knew the family history intimately. That might explain her interest in Lady Eleanor's condition and her letter to Dr. Keller. Perhaps she suspected something hereditary, or something inherited, said Miss Marple quietly. He blinked. You mean money? I mean knowledge. Doctor, which can be a far more perilous inheritance. The village fete. Despite the tension, the annual village fete went ahead that Saturday, largely because Mrs. Pettifer declared it would keep up morale. The green was bright with bunting, though the mood was subdued. A few stalls sold, jams and needlework. The brass band struggled valiantly against the drizzle. Miss Marple moved among the crowd, with her usual mild smile, her sharp eyes noting every glance and whisper. She observed Alice Pettifer laughing a little too loudly beside the tombola stall, while Sir Basil, freshly returned from London, stood stiffly by the tea tent. At one point, Sir Basil approached Dr. Miles and said something in a low, urgent tone. The doctor's face darkened. He replied curtly, and the two men parted. Miss Marple saw Lady Eleanor's maid, Lucy, watching them anxiously. Shortly after, Alice slipped away toward the church path. Miss Marple followed at a discreet distance and found the girl sitting on a bench, head in hands. My dear, said Miss Marple gently, you look troubled. Alice looked up, eyes bright with tears. It's awful, Miss Marple. I can't bear it any. Longer the secrets, the lies. What secrets, child? She bit her lip. I shouldn't say, But Sir Basil, he's furious with Dr. Miles. He says the doctor's been hiding something about Nurse Reeves. And I found something too." She fumbled in her pocket and drew out a small envelope. It was tucked inside one of Nurse Reeves's medical books at the vicarage library. "Look." Inside was a faded letter, written in a firm foreign hand. "My dear Gladys, the truth about the Montfort inheritance must not be concealed forever. You have the proof in your possession. Use it if conscience demands. F.K." Miss Marple read it silently, then folded it. "You were right to show me, my dear. May I keep this for a short while?" Alice nodded miserably. "Do you think, Sir Basil?" "I think," said Miss Marple gently, "that we must be very careful what we think until we are certain." An unexpected visitor. That evening, Inspector Craddock returned from London, where he had been tracing the nurse's foreign connections. He called at the Elms at dusk. "Well, Miss Marple," he said grimly, "it gets thicker. That Swiss doctor, Keller, he confirms he knew Nurse Reeves well. She was involved in an inheritance case there some years back. A patient died wealthy, childless, left a fortune in trust. There was a dispute about the rightful heir, and the name of the deceased." Craddock consulted his notebook. "A certain Lord Montfort." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Then the circle closes. But there's more," Craddock continued. "Keller says Nurse Reeves once hinted she had evidence that the present Sir Basil was not the true heir, that a legitimate son had been hidden away years ago." Miss Marple's knitting needles lay idle. "Then I fear we begin to understand her peril. The river bank." The next morning, a new alarm spread through the village. A fisherman had found a woman's cloak caught against a weir in the river, half a mile below Wychwood Spinney. The police were summoned. Miss Marple, standing on the bridge, beside Inspector Craddock, watched as the sodden garment was hauled ashore, its lining blue, serge. "The nurse's," Craddock confirmed. "The same fabric as the piece found in the wood." Miss Marple bent close. Something glinted faintly at the collar, a broken clasp in the shape of a swan. "Not torn by chance," she murmured. "Someone ripped this off deliberately, perhaps to suggest a struggle." Craddock frowned. "You think it was staged?" "I think," she said softly, "that our culprit is both clever and desperate. A night of storm. That night, a storm broke over much. Diddling sheets of rain, thunder rolling over the hills. Miss Marple sat wakeful by her fire, uneasy. She had the sense of a play nearing its final act, where the actors, driven by fear or greed, begin to reveal their true selves. Near midnight, there came a knock at her door. It was Harris, drenched and trembling. "Miss Marple, forgive me, but something dreadful's happened. Lady Eleanor, she's gone." "Gone?" "Yes, madam. Her bed's empty, her window open. There's a note on her dressing table." He handed her the note. In faint, delicate handwriting it read, "I cannot live among such deceit. I go to join Gladys. She will understand." Miss Marple rose at once, her eyes keen. "Harris, fetch Inspector Craddock, and tell him to meet us at the Spinney. The second disappearance." Within half an hour, Miss Marple, Craddock, and the constable were searching Wychwood Spinney by torchlight. Rain dripped from the branches. The path was treacherous. Near the stile, the beam of Craddock's lamp fell upon something pale, a woman's scarf, torn and muddy. "No sign beyond this," said Pottle, panting. "No footprints, rain's washed them out." Craddock muttered an oath. "Another disappearance? But why here again?" Miss Marple stood very still, listening to the rush of the nearby river. "Because," she said softly, "this place has been chosen twice, and chosen for a reason. Whoever staged the nurse's death meant us to believe she perished here, Lady Eleanor has come to the same conclusion. And someone feared she might speak. She turned to Craddock. Inspector, you must have Sir Basil brought at once. And the doctor. Tonight. Craddock stared. You think? I think the curtain is about to rise, said Miss Marple quietly. Thunder rumbled again above the woods, echoing through the dark like the slow beating of a guilty heart. The storm had blown itself out by dawn, leaving much diddling washed and trembling under a pale grey sky. Branches littered the lanes, and the air smelled sharply of wet earth and ozone. Yet even the weather seemed secondary to the murmurs running through the village. Lady Eleanor Montfort was missing. Inspector Craddock had wasted no time. By 9 o'clock he had gathered Sir Basil Montfort, Dr. Leonard Miles, Alice Pettifer, and Harris in the drawing-room of Montfort Hall. Miss Marple was there too, quietly knitting in a corner, looking for all the world like an elderly aunt who had wandered into the wrong meeting. Sir Basil stood by the hearth, stiff and furious. I protest, Inspector, he said coldly. This intrusion into my household is intolerable. My wife is unwell, possibly distraught. Your questioning will not help her. Your wife is missing, Sir Basil, Craddock said evenly. We must find her before further harm is done. Dr. Miles, pale from lack of sleep, sat with his head bowed, his fingers clenched around his hat. Alice Pettifer stood by the window, anxious and silent. Harris, behind her, looked drawn but resolute. Miss Marple, finishing a row of knitting, looked up mildly. Perhaps, Inspector, before we begin, we might establish one simple thing. Truth. Sir Basil gave her a sharp glance. I beg your pardon, Miss Marple? I only mean Sir Basil, she said softly. That truth has been in short supply of late in this house and in the village. And without truth, no one can be safe. Craddock nodded curtly. Very well, Miss Marple. You've had remarkable insight in this case. Perhaps you'll tell us what you believe has happened. She inclined her head. With pleasure. But first, a few questions. The nurse's secret. Miss Marple turned to Dr. Miles. Doctor, you have confirmed that Nurse Reeves once worked in Switzerland, yes? Yes, he said, uneasy. At the Montreux Clinic. And you did not know, until recently, that her patient there was the late Lord Montfort? No. Then allow me to enlighten you all, said Miss Marple. Nurse Reeves tended Lord Montfort in his final illness. He was suffering from a hereditary blood disorder, the same which afflicts Lady Eleanor. But what few knew, and what Nurse Reeves discovered, was that Lord Montfort had a legitimate heir, a child born abroad from a secret marriage. That heir was the true inheritor of the Montfort title and estate. There was a murmur around the room. Sir Basil's face hardened. Nonsense. I am the rightful heir. The will was proved beyond question. Indeed, said Miss Marple gently, because the evidence of the child's existence, birth records, marriage certificate, vanished conveniently after Lord Montfort's death. But Nurse Reeves, it seems, retained copies. She felt bound by conscience to protect them until she knew the right course. When she came to much diddling and found herself engaged as Lady Eleanor's nurse, she realized the significance of the past and the danger of the truth. Sir Basil's hands clenched. You have no proof of this wild theory. Oh, but we do, Miss Marple said. The letter she wrote to Dr. Franz Keller in Geneva, the man who signed the certificate as witness. The locket found near the stile bears his inscription, confirming their association. Dr. Miles frowned. Then why vanish? Why not come forward? Because, Miss Marple replied, she was being watched. She confided in Harris, who had known her from the Swiss clinic. She feared that someone here had already guessed what she knew and would stop at nothing to silence her. Her gaze moved to Sir Basil. You, perhaps. He stiffened. That's outrageous. Is it? You left for London, the morning after her disappearance, conveniently absent when suspicion arose, yet no one saw you board the train." Craddock glanced sharply at him. "Is that true, Sir Basil? I travelled by car, alone." "How convenient indeed," Miss Marple murmured. "And when you returned, the first person to fall mysteriously ill was your wife." Sir Basil flushed darkly. "Are you implying I poisoned her?" Miss Marple smiled, almost apologetically. "Not at all, Sir Basil. You are far too practical for crude methods. But it is curious that Lady Eleanor's fainting fits began shortly after her nurse disappeared, and shortly after you took to administering her medicine yourself." Dr. Miles started. "That's impossible. I prepared the tonics myself." "Yes, but who gave them?" Miss Marple said softly. "Lady Eleanor's. Maid tells me you insisted on overseeing each dose." Sir Basil turned on her with fury. "You meddling old woman." "Steady on, sir," Craddock warned, but Miss Marple's tone remained serene. "I meddle only with truth, Sir Basil, and I think it frightened you that Nurse Reeves might expose a scandal that could strip you of title and fortune. You confronted her that night, near the stile perhaps, where she had gone to meet Harris. There was a struggle, she fell, and you panicked. You placed her belongings to suggest abduction, and threw her cloak into the river to complete the illusion." "That's a lie," Sir Basil thundered. "You've no body, no proof." "Not yet," Miss Marple said. "But perhaps we have something better a witness. A return from the shadows." At that moment, the door opened. Harris entered, followed by a pale, trembling figure wrapped in a shawl. Lady Eleanor Montfort. She was alive. There was a collective gasp. Sir Basil staggered back. "Eleanor! Good God! Where have you been?" "In the gardener's cottage," she said faintly. "Harris hid me there after I escaped through the window. I feared you would find the papers that one's Nurse Reeves left with me." "What papers?" Craddock asked quickly. Lady Eleanor drew a small envelope from her shawl. "These. She entrusted them to me the night before she disappeared. She said they concerned my husband's inheritance. I was afraid to read them, afraid of what they might mean. But when I heard Sir Basil speaking with Dr. Miles in anger that evening, I knew she was in danger. I saw her bicycle near the stile later that night, and someone else there, too." Her voice trembled. "It was you, Basil. Eleanor, for heaven's sake. I watched from the window," she cried. "You were arguing. Then she fell. I ran out, but you'd gone, and she lay so still I couldn't move her, couldn't think. Then Harris came, and together we carried her into the wood. She was already dead." A shocked silence fell. Miss Marple's knitting lay forgotten in her lap. "So that was how it happened. You tried to protect your husband, my dear, but fear can be as dangerous as guilt." Sir Basil sank into a chair, white-faced. She attacked me. I only meant to stop her from ruining us. She said she'd go to the police with her proof. I pushed her away. I swear I didn't mean." Craddock raised a hand. "That will do, Sir Basil." He turned to Harris. "You knew?" "Yes, sir," Harris said quietly. "I helped hide the body near the river bank, hoping it would be washed away. But when Lady Eleanor fell ill, I feared the truth would kill her." Miss Marple regarded him gravely. "And yet it is truth, not silence, that heals. The nurse's body." The confession led to swift action. Under Miss Marple's direction, police searched the spot. Harris indicated a hollow near the river, covered by bracken and driftwood. By afternoon, they found what remained of Nurse Gladys Reeves. Inspector Craddock's face was grim as he returned to the hall. "You were right, Miss Marple. It's her identification beyond doubt." She nodded sadly. "Poor woman. She came seeking honesty and found deceit. Sir Basil was taken into custody. Lady Eleanor, weeping softly, clung to Miss Marple's hand. "I wanted to tell someone," she whispered, "but I was weak, so afraid." "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "fear often drives the worst mistakes, but confession, though painful, is the beginning of peace." The inheritance. Revealed. Later that evening, Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock examined the papers Nurse Reeves had left with Lady Eleanor. They included Swiss birth records and legal certificates, proving that Lord Montfort had a legitimate son born during his exile, before his second marriage. That son had been placed with relatives abroad after his mother's death, and presumed dead. Miss Marple pointed to a name at the bottom of the document, Leonard Miles. Craddock looked up sharply. "Good heavens, the doctor!" "Indeed," Miss Marple said, "the true heir of Montfort Hall." When Dr. Miles was informed, he was dumbfounded. My mother never told me. She said my father was a patient who died abroad. I never dreamed." Miss Marple smiled gently. "She wished to protect you, no doubt, and Nurse Reeves wished to right the wrong when she discovered the truth." Craddock exhaled. "Well, that wraps it neatly, doesn't it? Sir Basil's guilt, the inheritance, the nurse's secret, all of it tied together." Miss Marple resumed her knitting. "Not neatly, Inspector, but justly, perhaps. Human hearts are seldom tidy." A quiet reflection. That night, as peace settled once more over much diddling, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the rain taper into silver threads. The world, she reflected, had a way of righting itself after storms. The guilty were punished, the innocent restored, and the small rhythms of village life resumed their patient beat. Yet her mind lingered on Nurse Gladys Reeves, brave, lonely, principled, whose conscience had cost her life. In her diary that night, Miss Marple wrote only one line: "Truth, like the dawn, may be delayed but never extinguished." The days following Sir Basil's arrest brought a curious quiet to much diddling, the kind that follows both tempest and tragedy. It was as though the entire village had drawn a long, shuddering breath, and now sat, waiting, to exhale. By the second morning, the papers had already reached the High Street. Local aristocrat in custody read the Daily Gazette. Body of missing nurse found. The villagers read the headlines in the post office queue, murmuring in tones of half fascination, half horror. At the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with a cup of tea and the latest copy of the Church Times, though her mind was far from church matters. The events of the past week had left her thoughtful, even a little sad. Reverend Leonard Harper, who had been visiting with his wife, looked at her kindly. "You seem troubled, Miss Marple. Surely justice has been done?" "Oh, yes," she said quietly. "But justice, dear Reverend, is a complicated matter. The law punishes wrongdoing, but it cannot always heal what led to it." Mrs. Harper sighed. "Lady Eleanor must be utterly desolate." "She is, poor soul, though I think she'll find her way back to peace. Harris has been her staunch companion, and the village, now that the truth is known, will rally round. We are, after all, very good at sympathy, once the gossip has run its course." The vicar smiled faintly. "And Dr. Miles?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Ah, yes, Dr. Miles. He has had quite a shock, poor man, to learn he's the rightful heir of Montfort Hall, but he has no taste for grandeur. He told me only yesterday that he means to turn the Hall into a convalescent home for district nurses. A fitting tribute, don't you think, to Nurse Reeves?" The Reverend nodded approvingly. "Indeed." Miss Marple sipped her tea. "It is curious how the Almighty arranges things. The very woman who lost her life for truth has, in a sense, provided for her profession through it. The calm after the storm. By the end of the week, much diddling had regained its habitual rhythm. Mrs. Price, in the grocer's gossiping cheerfully. Children tumbling down the green, and Mr. Cottle's donkey obstinately refusing to move outside the post office. Even tragedy, Miss Marple reflected, must eventually make way for the necessities of daily life, washing, gardening, the endless boiling of kettles. Still, some wounds ran deep. Lady Eleanor Montfort remained at Montfort Hall, though the house had changed. Without Sir Basil's presence, it seemed lighter, almost relieved. The heavy curtains had been drawn back, the gardens tended once more, and visitors came and went with gentle discretion. Miss Marple called upon her one mild afternoon, carrying a small basket of preserves, raspberry and damson, her best. Harris admitted her with a warm, if weary, smile. "You're very good to come, Miss Marple. Her ladyship's been asking after you. I thought she might be in need of company," Miss Marple said softly. Lady Eleanor received her in the sunlit morning room, wrapped in a pale shawl. Her face was thin, but there was a new steadiness in her eyes. "Miss Marple," she said, taking her hand, "I hardly know how to thank you." "There is no need for thanks, my dear," Miss Marple replied. "I only did what anyone would have done if they had noticed the little things." Lady Eleanor smiled faintly. "Those little things of yours seem to mean rather a lot." Miss Marple chuckled. "Oh, they do. It's astonishing what one can deduce from a misplaced teacup or a scuffed bicycle pedal. Life, you know, leaves crumbs of truth everywhere. Most people simply sweep them away." She reached across and patted Lady Eleanor's hand. "You have been through a dreadful ordeal, but you mustn't lose heart. You acted out of fear, a very human fault. The important thing is that you now have the courage to face it. The go today." Tears shimmered in Lady Eleanor's eyes. "I only wish I had listened to Nurse Reeves sooner. She was such a kind soul, so firm, but never unfeeling." "She was indeed," Miss Marple said, "and though her life was cut short, she achieved what she set out to do. She brought truth into the light." And there was a silence, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Then Lady Eleanor spoke again, hesitantly. "Do you suppose she forgave me, in the end?" Miss Marple's gaze was very gentle. "I believe she did, my dear. The truly good often forgive before we even know we've done them wrong." The inspector's visit. Later that week, Inspector Craddock came to call at Miss Marple's cottage in Street Mary Mead, where she had returned briefly before heading back to Much Diddling to help arrange a small memorial for Nurse Reeves. He found her pruning her roses with a pair of delicate shears. "Ah, Inspector," she said cheerily, "I was just thinking of you. There's some seed cake in the tin, if you'd care for a slice." Craddock laughed. "I never refuse your seed cake, Miss Marple, but I came to say thank you. Without your observations, I dare say we'd still be chasing rumours of kidnappers and foreign spies." Miss Marple smiled modestly. "Nonsense. You'd have seen through it in time. I merely happened to notice a few inconsistencies." He raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Well," she said, trimming a petal, "for one thing, the bicycle tracks near the stile. There were 2 sets, one from the road and one returning, but the returning mark stopped abruptly. That told me someone had lifted the bicycle, not ridden it away. Then there was the matter of Lady Eleanor's fainting fits. I have never known nervous exhaustion to strike so conveniently after a person's disappearance, and Sir Basil's insistence on administering her medicine well, that is never a good sign." Craddock chuckled. "You make it sound so simple." "Oh, but it is simple, Inspector, once one knows what to look for. In my experience, evil rarely hides behind complexity." It hides behind the ordinary, a husband's temper, a servant's loyalty, a woman's fear. All the rest is embroidery." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I shan't argue. The Crown will press for manslaughter, not murder. The jury will see it was a moment's fury rather than premeditation. But the truth, at least, is known." Miss Marple looked up at the blue autumn sky. "Yes, and that is a blessing." A village farewell. A week later, the villagers gathered in the small stone church for Nurse Gladys Reeves's memorial service. It was a modest affair, white, lilies, simple hymns, and the scent of beeswax candles mingling with damp autumn air. Miss Marple sat in the second pew, beside Dr. Miles and Lady Eleanor. The vicar spoke movingly of service and sacrifice, of truth and duty. As the final notes of Abide With Me drifted through the nave, a pale shaft of light fell across the plaque that would bear Nurse Reeves's name. When the service ended, the congregation filed out quietly. At the churchyard gate, Mrs. Bantry whispered to Miss Marple, "A sad business, wasn't it? Though between ourselves, my dear, I can't say I'm surprised. That Sir Basil always had the look of a man who'd boil over sooner or later." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said. "But one must remember, Mrs. Bantry, that tempers, like kettles, are often the result of being kept on the boil too long." Mrs. Bantry blinked. "Oh, quite so, quite so." Dr. Miles, overhearing, smiled faintly. "You always find a homely way of putting things, Miss Marple. I'm not sure the Crown Prosecutor would have thought of it like that." "Then he should spend more time in a village," Miss Marple said primly, "restoring peace." The following spring, Montfort Hall reopened as the Reeves Convalescent Home for District Nurses, with Lady Eleanor as its quiet patron and Dr. Miles as medical director. The hall's once gloomy corridors were filled with flowers, sunlight, and laughter. Nurses recovering from illness walked the gardens where their namesake had once taken her final steps. Miss Marple attended the opening ceremony, wearing her best hat and a small spray of violets pinned to her coat. When Dr. Miles gave his speech modest, heartfelt, and full of gratitude, she felt an odd stirring of pride, though she would never have admitted it. Afterwards, as tea was served on the lawn, Lady Eleanor took her aside. "Miss Marple, I wanted you to have this." She handed her a small silver locket, newly polished. Inside was a miniature portrait of Nurse Reeves, painted from a photograph. On the opposite side, engraved in fine script, were the words, "Truth endures." Miss Marple's eyes grew misty. "How very lovely, and most appropriate." Lady Eleanor smiled. "She would have liked you." Miss Marple looked out over the lawn, where young nurses were laughing among the daffodils. "Perhaps she does," she said softly. Epilogue. Reflections in the garden. That evening, back in her little garden at Street Mary Mead, Miss Marple watered her roses and thought of much diddling. The world, she mused, is full of quiet tragedies and quiet redemptions. People often thought her preoccupation with human behavior quaint, even meddlesome, but she had long since learned that evil was not confined to cities or grand conspiracies. It sprouted in village soil just as easily as marigolds and thistles. As twilight deepened, she settled into her chair by the window, with her knitting, and smiled to herself. "Murder, my dear Raymond once said, is the end of reason," she murmured, "but I think it's more often the result of hurt, the kind that festers in silence." She glanced at the little silver locket glinting beside her teacup. "And sometimes," she added softly, "truth requires its martyrs. His co's wise." Then, as the church bell chimed the hour, Miss Marple poured herself a final cup of tea, drew her shawl around her shoulders, and watched the evening stars emerge serene, steadfast, and shining on a world once again at peace.